In this video, I want to dive into writing C# for the first time together. C# is a programming language. It's the one we're going to be using in these videos. And I want to make what is specifically called a Hello World application. It's like the most basic application you can make. It's a rite of passage in programming when you're learning a new programming language, where you just learn how to print out the text Hello World to the screen using your programming language of choice. So in this case, we're going to be making a console application. So console application, I have one of the Windows consoles open, the command prompt. It is essentially an interface for interacting with code that is text-based. So you're typically, when you open up your computer, interacting with software that is a graphical user interface. So like this whiteboard application that I have open here, I can click on these different buttons and interact with them and draw on the screen. That's the world of graphical user interface. And the world of terminals or consoles is generally text-based. So we're starting there because it is a great place to start learning the basics of coding. There's not a lot of stuff that we have to learn, underlying concepts, to be able to print things out to the screen in a console window. GUI, or graphical user interface programming, much more complicated, more things we have to learn. So we'll start here in console and we'll get to building those graphical user interfaces later. So what we're going to do is we're going to build our first console app, and we're going to learn how to use Visual Studio 2019. We'll take a quick tour of Visual Studio and what a project looks like, and then we'll dive into writing our code. We'll do this Hello World, and from there we will sort of progressively enhance it, add new features, learn a little bit more about what we can do in a console window. So what I want to do here is go ahead and switch over to Visual Studio. I'm opening Visual Studio 2019. I'll have a link in the description that shows you how to install Visual Studio 2019. I'm going to assume you already have it on your machine, and I'm going to create a new project here. And when we are working on console applications, we want to choose a console application template. So I can search through these templates here. I can just type in console and hit enter, and it'll show me different ones that are available installed on my machine. I have the .NET Core one. There's also a .NET Framework one. Sort of oversimplifying here, .NET Core is the future. It's like the latest version. It's cross-platform. So that's the one we're going to be using in these videos. So that's the one you want to choose here. I will also just throw out there that there are other templates. So later on, when we learn about graphical user interfaces and web programming, we'll build a Blazor app and we'll choose a different template. But for starting, what we're going to be doing is console app .NET Core. So I click that, I'm going to click next, and then I'm going to name this. Let's call it Hello World. And in this drop down here, I'm going to choose where I want to save it. Generally, you want to keep all your projects together somewhere so that you can always find them later. I'm going to go into teaching. I'm going to go into my intro to programming folder here. I'm just going to create a folder called week 1 to put this in, and go ahead and hit create. What this is going to do is create a couple of files that are all in that location in my intro to programming week 1 folder. So before we even kind of deal with this code, I want to take a look at those files that were generated. So if I navigate there by opening up File Explorer and go to my desktop, go into teaching, go into week 1 here, I can see the folder that was created. The other way to get here, if I didn't remember where I put it, I can right click on my solution up here on the sidebar, and I can then click on Open Folder in File Explorer. That'll take me to that location. So here's my week 1 folder with Hello World in it. So when we create a new project, it's giving us this SLN file, a solution file, and it's also creating this folder with the same name as our solution. And if I go in there, we can see a folder for bin, OBJ, we can see a CS project, and we can see a CS file. What I want to highlight at this point is that your SLN That is, you can think of that as your project. Technically, it can be multiple projects bundled together. But this is the thing that if I were to close Visual Studio, I would want to double click on to open that project again. You don't want to go in here and like double click on the program.cs or hello world.cs project. Those aren't the full project that Visual Studio needs to open to be able to edit and run it. You want to make sure that you're opening your SLN, your solution. So once I've got that, we have a template. This is actually already a hello world application. And if I hit play, it's going to go ahead and run and pop open a terminal window for this, the smallest sort of split second of time before it disappears. And this, you can configure your Visual Studio when you're writing your code to keep that window open. I have mine configured to close and act like it would in the real world. When you were, you build this project, you share it with someone, this is what they would see. So I want to add something here to this hello world application to keep that console window open. Because basically what happens is that our code starts running here inside of these brackets. This is called the main function. We'll talk about functions later, but basically it runs everything that's in between these two brackets. It starts at the top, runs that first one, runs the next one, the next one, the next one, until it runs out of lines inside of these two brackets, and then it closes. The application's done. So what I can do here is console.read key. Console write line is a command to print something out to that console window. Console read key is a command that tells the console, hey, listen to the next key press. So we're using this here to kind of say, let's print something out and let's wait for the user to press something before we finish our application. Because once they've pressed something, we're done with the lines of code in here, application closes. So if I hit play, we see hello world, and I can actually zoom this in. So if I hold control and use my mouse wheel, I can make this slightly bigger. So we can see it prints out hello world, there's a blinking cursor, and as soon as I hit a key, this closes and our application is done. So hey, we did it. We wrote our first project. I mean, admittedly, we didn't write a lot of this code. This is the boilerplate from Visual Studio, but we got our rite of passage. We got it to print out hello world. So we can tweak this a little bit. We can make it better. We can say, we can duplicate this line of code exactly and say, hello world, this is Mike. And another one, press any key to exit. So here, when our code executes, it starts on this line. So this is the first line that's in this main function. We can tell because it's the first line after the opening bracket here. It's going to print out hello world. It's printing that out on its own line. Then it prints out this is Mike on the next line. Then it prints out press any key to exit. Then we get down here where it waits for any key to be pressed before the application's done. And we know it's done because it's the last line of code in here inside of our main function. So if I run it, hello world, this is Mike, press any key to exit. Excellent. We modified our first hello world program to have it print out a little bit more. Now that we've got something running, I want to give you a little bit of a tour of Visual Studio. So we have three main windows that we want to pay attention to when we're working in Visual Studio, at least when we're beginning. So the first one is this box down here that is the output window. So when we hit play, this output window fills up with information about how the application is being built. And then here we can see when we finish running, it prints out information about, oh, the program is exited with code 0, which means it exited successfully. Down here, there's also an error list. So if we make a mistake in our code, it is going to give us a bunch of errors here that we can then try and fix to make sure that our code actually runs. So this will be really important in a second when we start making mistakes. All programmers make mistakes. It's part of the process. That's why this window is really important. Okay, so that's our bottom window, output error list. Over here on the right-hand side, we have our Solution Explorer. which shows us all of the things that are contained within our project. So we have our hello world solution, and we can see that it has a program.cs file within it. Right now, we only have one file in our project, so there's not a ton to see here, but as we add more things to our project, we would see more files over here. So if we're making a game, we might have a file for player, we might have a file for enemy, we might have a file for weapon. There would be more to see in the Solution Explorer. Then over here, we have our editor window, so we can double click on files that are over here to open them and edit them. So if I accidentally closed program.cs, what I could do is double click on program.cs to open it up over here. So those are the three main areas that I want you to focus on as we're building our first console application. If for some reason one of those is missing, like let's say I accidentally clicked the X here and now my error and my output windows are gone, you can get those back. It's just you go to view, you look for which one you accidentally closed. Like here, I closed the output, so I'm going to open that. And I closed the error list, so I'm going to open that. They're back. Same thing with the Solution Explorer. If you close that, you can always bring it back from view. The other thing that I want to point out before we add any more code is that when we hit play here and we look back at our toolbar at the top, that play button is grayed out, but you should now see a pause, a stop, and a restart button. So we can interact with our application until it closes, or if we want to just shut it down and get back to coding, we can easily just click the stop. Application is done. And while we're on the topic of starting and stopping the application, I also want to point out, if we go back to our File Explorer here, so I'm clicking on my solution, open folder and File Explorer, and I look in here, when we hit play, what's actually happening is our application is being built. So inside of this bin folder, which stands for binary, that is where the output is. So currently we have our setting up here to debug for our configuration. So there's going to be a debug folder here. And then there is going to be a folder for which version of .NET you're using. And inside of there, all the way down, is your built version of your application. So here I'm building for Windows, so I get an executable, an exe. And if I double click that, that runs my application outside of Visual Studio. So if I want someone else to be able to run the code that I'm building, I can just grab this folder, share it with someone, and they can check it out. Provided that, EXEs, those run on Windows machines, so I would have to be building for Windows, sharing it with someone who has a Windows machine. You'll see different output here if you're on Mac and Linux. Okay, back to our code. Let's intentionally make a mistake here. So pretend that I forgot the semicolon as I was typing. Programming and code is very specific about the characters that you have to type. So something like that will generate an error. And when you have an error, Visual Studio is going to give you little squigglies here to tell you, hey, something went wrong. This is where I was parsing the code and discovered that something was wrong. And if we come down here to our error list, there will be a list of all of the errors. So if I double click on this, it'll take my cursor to where that error is. In whichever file that error is happening. I can also see here the description, or I can hover over the red squiggle and see that it's telling me, hey, I expected to see a semicolon, which is great. That's really helpful. That tells me what to do here. So that's an easy kind of error. Sometimes you will make mistakes that you won't catch, like say I accidentally deleted that curly bracket. That was a really important curly bracket. That broke a lot of stuff in my code. So you can see squiggles everywhere. So don't freak out when that happens. When you get a bunch of errors, what you want to do is go to your error list and try starting at the top to see if you can figure out what that first error means. Because sometimes an error that you make, like I did on line 8 here, will cause a whole sequence, a whole cascade of errors. And we can see it's telling us something is wrong with program main, that it needs a body, because it's not marked as abstract. And this thing in between the curly brackets is the body. So it sort of broke here. It didn't see a body that was supposed to be there. These, when you're starting out, will seem really obtuse. They're hard to understand. But if you stick with it and you keep picking up programming lingo, you'll start to make sense of these errors. And these errors are really your first line of defense in sort of figuring out what's wrong in your code. So if I knew what that meant and I figured it out and I looked back at where it was happening, added a curly bracket, all of those errors went away. So the next thing I want to show you are comments. Comments allow us to annotate our code. They don't change how the code executes, so they're not going to add any functionality. When we run the application, it's going to look the same. Comments are just there for us to leave notes for ourselves to explain how the code works and leave notes to other developers that maybe we're collaborating with. And there are two types of comments. One is a single line comment, so I'll just throw that in here. Single line comment, and another is a multi-line comment. So a single line comment, when we put 2 forward slashes on a line of code, tells the interpreter running our code like, hey, this line of code does not do anything. Ignore it. Don't try and run anything. So anything we place on this line, I'll ignore it. A multi-line comment is one that starts here with a / asterisk and ends with asterisk / Anything between these two delimiters, the start and end, is ignored. So nothing that we put in here runs. So if I try and do like a console.writeLine, that's ignored. That's not going to print out here. So if I try running it, we're just going to see what we had before. Hello world, this is Mike, press any key to exit. It's as if we didn't even have these in our code. So comments, they'll be really valuable when you start working on a team. And when you're learning, comments can be really helpful for you to sort of annotate what you've learned in your code so that you can refer back to your code as kind of a study sheet. So here I could say, WriteLine prints out a line of text to the console. And then down here, what I could note is read key waits for a key to be pressed. We use this here to keep the console window open until the user presses a key. So using comments, we've kind of documented what the code does. If we look back at it, we'll be like, oh yeah, that's what read key does. And again, none of this changes how the code executes. This is just for us. So next thing that I want to talk about is adding a little bit more functionality here. So if I put my cursor over WriteLine or console and then hit F1, this is going to open up the documentation page in my browser. Here we go. For that entity that I have my cursor over. I'm being a little hand wavy here because we haven't talked about a lot of concepts yet. Technically, console is a class, so it's bringing me to the console class page. We'll unpack that. But really what this is docs.microsoft.com, specifically for C# and the .NET Core version that we're using. So this you can also get to, like if I want to know how to use console WriteLine, I'm just going to do console.WriteLine C#, Google search. One of the first results is going to be the Microsoft documentation, and then you'll get a bunch of other results that are tutorials and other information. So 2 ways you can get there. You can hit F1, at least that's the hotkey on Windows, to get the documentation pulled up, or you can just turn to Google, whatever you're looking for, plus C#. So the process of reading documentation, incredibly important skill. This is how you start to learn how to use C# without having to watch tutorials. And this is what the kind of muscle we want to train up over time. But I will tell you up front that Microsoft did not write these for beginners. There are a lot of concepts here. These are technical documentation, so it's a skill to learn how to read them. Just keep in mind that you won't understand everything in here. But we can start reading it, and we can learn to pick apart the key information that we need and kind of put the stuff that we don't understand on the back burner. And we'll come back to it later. So here it's telling us the console class. We don't know what class is, but we know what console is. It's that terminal window. It represents the standard input, output, and error streams for console applications. So standard input, output, those mean that you can print things out, you can get input from a user, and also has to do with errors that occur during the console app, during the lifetime of the console app. And most documentation pages will have this kind of description at the top. They'll have a little example snippet. So here we can see a couple of different things that you can do with the console class. We can see console.write, console.writeLine, console.readLine. So things we haven't quite seen yet. And these snippets, you can often copy them and bring them into your project to run them, see how they work. And then for what I want to do today, we would keep scrolling down. There's a whole bunch of information here on the console class. It's good to try and read through those. At this point, we don't know enough to really understand all of these concepts. So I want to fly down to the properties and methods section. So you can think of properties as pieces of data related to the console, and methods are things you can ask the console to do. Technically, property is like a piece of data, you can kind of think of it as like a variable that is associated with the class. Again, don't worry if you don't know what these terms mean yet. Just think about properties as pieces of information you can manipulate. Methods are actions you can ask the console to take. So if I look in the method section, I can see, oh, hey, here's a read key. That's how we used it. It tells us it obtains the next character or function key pressed by the user, and the pressed key is displayed in the console window. If I scroll down, I can see read line. This reads the next line of characters from the standard input stream. So key is for one key press. Line would be to read a bunch of characters until the person presses enter. And if you look at any of these, you can click through to see more information. So you'll see a description up at the top for read line. It's telling us some information about what it returns, which we'll get into that when we start talking about functions, but you'll also have an example down here. Unfortunately, this one's like a pretty complex one as far as examples go, but these examples are useful to look for because they will give you an idea of how to use the piece of code that you are currently trying to research. So I'm going to flip back here. And let's go back up to properties. And there are a couple that I want to show you. So under properties, we can see that there's a title property, which it says gets or sets the title to display in the console title bar. So we'll start with that one. If I flip back and say console.title equals Mike's first app and hit play, we can now see Mike's first app showing up here in the title bar. So console.title doesn't change what's in here, it changes what's up at the top of the toolbar here. And if I were to come back in and comment out this code, so I'm going to put 2 slashes at the beginning to make it a comment, which means that this is not going to be run it again, we can see that the default title is this like goofy looking file path for where my executable is located, which doesn't look great. So that's why we're going to add a title to our application here, Mike's first app. And if we flip back, let's look at foreground color. Gets or sets the foreground color of the console, and background color gets or sets the background color of the console. So we can use these to change what color of text we are displaying. So if I click on foreground color, gets or sets the foreground color. We see some word here, console color. If I scroll down, we can see an example. And again, it's not all going to make sense just yet, but I can see a snippet that looks like it makes sense, like console.background color equals console color red. So that probably sets the background to red. Foreground color equals console color dot black. That probably sets the foreground color to black. So I'm going to try typing something like that into my code here. So after I set the title, I'm going to say console dot foreground. And you can see that IntelliSense, this autocomplete, is popping up as I'm typing. And if it pops up and my cursor is over foreground color and I click it, double click it, it's going to fill in that for me. Or if I'm doing foreground color and I hit tab, that will autocomplete for me. So console.foreground color equals console color dot, and I can see from the IntelliSense the options that I have. So we'll talk about how to use more colors than what's here later, but this is a good kind of starting point. So here, let's choose white for, oh, actually this is the foreground color. Let's set our foreground color to red. And let's set the background color to be white. And let's try running it. Cool. So we got our app running. We've got our text in red, a white background color. And I'm going to add a comment here. You can think of setting the foreground color and background color as like picking out a marker. So any text that we put after this will be written in this style. So hello world, this is Mike, press any key to exit, all are in red and white. But if I put hello world up here before the console color and run it, hello world is going to show up in the default color. Then we're switching our marker here and writing this is Mike, press any key to exit in our specified foreground and background color. So let's say think about this, or let's this is like setting the marker for the console. Any text that we print out after setting these will be drawn in the foreground, background color we choose. All right, if I flip back to my documentation here, I want to show you something that's under methods. The clear here clears the console buffer and corresponding console of display information. Clear basically just means it nukes whatever's there, so you end up with a blank console window. So if I put like clear at the end of my application, whoops, console.clear at the end of my application here and hit run, you know, that text displays for a split second, but then is cleared. But the thing that happened here is that our background turned all to white. So sometimes when we want to clear all of our console so that we get that background color showing up everywhere, we will set the background color and then we'll run clear. So if I do this, we can now see that our sort of window is painted in white before anything else is drawn on it, which I'm going to comment this out to show you what we had previously, where the whole background was the default color black and our text, anywhere it was drawn, it got a background color. So here we're kind of using clear for a side effect that it has of making the background window turn to our background color. So let's add a comment to explain that. If we clear after setting the background color, the window will be covered in that color. Great. So one more thing that I want to show you from the console class here is if we look down to our right line, we can see we've got right line. Actually, we've got a bunch of different versions of right line, which will make sense when we start talking about variables. Basically, these all right line, but do it slightly differently with slightly different information. But above it is right. So the difference between, say, right and right line, we can see that in our code. So let's do a little demo here. Let's say we do this. This one says hello. This one says this is Mike. Bring these up side by side. Or let's do it this way. So hello prints out HELLO. And then this is Mike starts printing right next to it. So our write command doesn't sort of move the cursor down to the next line after it finishes writing, but our write line does. So you can see this is Mike. When that's done, it moves the cursor down to the next line so that press any key to exit shows up on the next line. So we can use this if we wanted to say, print out hello in a special color. And then after that, let's print out hello there. So it's going to show up hello space there in our console. But because we've broken these out into two separate statements, we can change the color of this without affecting the color of this. So I'll show you that in practice here. So what we do is, just like we saw with setting our marker up here for our color, we can console.writeLine, whoops, brain fart, console dot, maybe we'll do the foreground color. Let's set the foreground color equal to blue. So if we set the foreground color to blue here, that means everything after that is changed to blue. So if we come back in and set the foreground color to red, after we set the foreground color to blue and print hello, that means all of this will be in red and just this will be in blue. So if I run it, we should see hello there, and then this is Mike. There are a couple of ways that we can print out white space in our code, in our application. So print out blank lines. One simple way that I'll show you to get started is console.writeLine, and then you put in 2 quotation marks with nothing in there. So what this is going to do is just print out an empty line in between there and this is Mike. And if I wanted to copy and paste this a couple of times, I'm now adding 3 blank spaces between there and this is Mike. And I could copy and paste these down here and print them out between this is Mike and press any key to exit. All right, so we've got kind of the basics of working with what's called the console class, printing things out, changing the style. I do want to show you one kind of cool thing that you can do that we'll use to end this video, and we'll save more stuff like input and asking the user for information and storing it in variables for later videos. What I want to finish with is using this piece of software. And I have a whole video on this. I'll have the link in the description, but this is a piece of software that can take text and turn it into what is called ASCII art. So here I could print out, let's do greetings. That is now being printed out using ASCII characters. So this isn't like an image. We're not using pixels. We're just using individual characters to print this out. And if I click the test all button, it's actually going to load that text in a whole bunch of different ASCII fonts. And I can try bringing some of these over into my code. So maybe I like this one. Maybe I want to bring in Crawford too. So when I find one that I like, I can click select and copy and bring it back over to my project here. And let's say I want to print this out before my hello there. If I were to just try and do this, this is going to cause some errors, so I'm just warning you up front. I'm going to create my 2 quotation marks for printing something out. I'm going to hit Control V to paste that in. A mess. We got a whole bunch of errors. My error list is going crazy, 159. So the thing is that if you want to print out a string, so a string of characters here, it can only be a single line. You can't hit enter and have it split across multiple lines. See, even as I try and hit enter, Visual Studio is smart enough to know, hey, you're trying to create a string here and add another string to it. It's not even letting me do the sort of mistake that I get here when I have it open and I paste something in and it ends down here. But there is a thing called a verbatim string. So if I go back, Control Z to undo this, and I'm going to say advanced verbatim string. A verbatim string allows us to type in new lines, so it allows us to have those line breaks. And the way that you create a verbatim string is start your string with at the beginning. So it starts with at open quotation mark, ends with closing quotation mark, and then we can have as many lines as we want in here. This is multi-line text. And if I run it, we will see all of those characters printing out here. So you can see that it's indented over. There's a starting blank line that I've got here. And there's a extra blank line after it that's coming from here. So we can use this verbatim string to go ahead and, instead of printing out this gibberish, I'm going to go ahead and delete everything in between these two. I can just paste in my ASCII text. No errors this time. It's all good to go. So I can hit play. My greeting prints out here, and then I've got my hello, this is Mike, press any key to exit. One little caveat here is that some characters are not allowed in your verbatim string and will mess things up. One of them that you might expect is a quotation mark. So if I had a font that had a quotation mark in it, it's going to think the string ended here, and then all of this stuff is gibberish to Visual Studio. So it's generating errors for all of them. So just be mindful. I'll link to a video that has workarounds for this that I've recorded that goes deeper into ASCII text and ASCII art. For now, just when you're pasting things in, if you see one that's not working, just move on to another one. There are plenty here that don't use quotation marks in it. Those will be valid. Like this one's perfectly fine to use. You want to, if you hit those errors, just try a different one. Don't worry too much about it. All right, so what we were able to do in this video, we took our tour of Visual Studio. We learned how to do the basic hello world. We got something printing out pretty quickly. And then we started learning a bit more about what we can do with console, and actually ended up with something that's kind of cool with some ASCII art in it, some different color. So go ahead, remix this, create your own kind of like hello world as your introduction to C#, and we will dive deeper in future videos.